Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Testing 1, 2. Testing, can you hear me now? Good afternoon, I'm Latika, and I want to tell you about a time when I was a little girl growing up in Savannah, Georgia. I visited my father's mother quite a bit. Her name was Lydia, and my grandmother had antiques on the walls of her house, and she had in her room, she had a traveler's trunk. I was always curious about that. She would always tell me, don't go into her shipper. That's an old word. But of course, I was curious. And so I went into the shipper and I saw a lot of little things in there. She also had a bureau in her room with a huge mirror. And I would sit at the seat at the bureau and comb my hair. And one time I cut my sister's hair. I wasn't supposed to cut her hair because I was 10 and she was 7. So that wasn't a good thing. But I was a curious little girl. And so she would sit me down to show me some of the photographs in her scrapbook. And these are pictures from the scrapbook. So today I'm going to tell you about my grandmother's uncle, my great grand uncle. His name's Robert Gaines. Robert Gaines was the brother of my great grandmother, Ophelia Gaines. They lived in Savannah, Georgia. And then he migrated to Raleigh, North Carolina. And then his career took him to Washington, D.C. So using genealogy records, we're going to explore the life of Robert H. Gaines. The H stands for Habersham. So as I said, he grew up in Savannah, and throughout this presentation, I'm going to call him Robert Gaines. I may say Robert, I may say Uncle Bob, because that's how I was first introduced to him, as Uncle Bob. His parents were Frederick and Charlotte, and he was born in 1870, the oldest of 6 children. Georgia did not require the registration of births until 1919. So there was no birth certificate or certificate of birth. In 1870, the 1870 US Census, my great-great-grandfather, Frederick Gaines, is shown listed with his wife, Charlotte, and Catherine. However, he didn't have a certificate of birth, but in this next genealogy record, he does appear. There's a mention of him in the Freedmen's Bank records. In 1871, Frederick Gaines, who is listed as being born in Habersham County, Georgia, he lists his wife as Charlotte and his children as Catherine, who's 2 years old, and Robert, who's 3 months. The next time we see Robert, he is listed in the 1880 census with his parents, Frederick and Charlotte, Catherine, his older sister, and here's Robert, he's 10 years old, along with his sister. So it was girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. My great-grandmother, Ophelia, is the youngest daughter. During this time, in the Freedmen's Savings Bank, you saw the register of Frederick Gaines. In this record, it also gives other information that is useful for African Americans when they are researching their history. So for example, this record is of Frederick Gaines, but it also lists his father and mother. So for me, this was the first time that I knew what my great grandparents' names were: Jack Gaines and Catherine Gaines. And then their son Frederick names his first daughter Catherine, and then his son Robert is named after his brother. During this time frame, these were the local newspapers: the Savannah Tribune and the Savannah Weekly Echo. They were newspapers that were, they tried to support the Black Americans in Savannah, and they also told about the discrimination, racial discrimination in the city. The Savannah Tribune was being published for about 6 years until they did not have their printing presses. So they didn't own the printing presses where the newspaper was being printed. Because of their outspokenness in the city and what they were publishing in their editorials, the newspaper was shut down. And then the Savannah Weekly Echo took its place and also published news for this in the city. So Robert gained his education, or earned his education in the free schools in Savannah, unlike his parents. But his mother tragically dies when he was 13 years old. This was in 1883. The hardship led him to grow up really fast, and his father relied on him and his sister Catherine to help take care of his younger siblings. So after finishing his education, he went to work. He went to work as a waiter. And in this city directory from 1896, and there are others before this year of 1896, but in the city directory, it's one place where you can find out about your ancestors and the occupations that they had. And so this was like the old school days of the telephone book, if you know what that is, okay? Today, it's the white pages online. And so in 1896, just before the turn of the century, Robert Gaines worked as a waiter at the DeSoto Hotel, which is still in operation in Savannah today. So from the DeSoto Hotel, Robert travels up north, but it was a tough time. We're talking about 20 years after the war. How could it still be a tough time? Well, the country had transitioned from agricultural-based society to mass production era with the Industrial Revolution. However, much of the progress that African Americans had made socially and economically were being reversed by white supremacy. Most of the political gains were lost. In 1896, the Supreme Court's ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson supported separately equal Jim Crow laws. And that meant that everywhere Blacks went, there was a separate area, including schools, restrooms, drinking fountains, libraries, restaurants, transportation, and accommodations. So these conditions were not good for Blacks, and the accommodations for Blacks were usually far below than those for whites. So without much support, Robert had to work his way through this double standard. He eventually gets to Raleigh by train. And at that time, the railroads were the central part of American life. The railroads crisscrossed the country. They carried people from manufacturing goods, food, the Daily Mail, and express packages. But there were low wages and limited opportunities for Blacks. And so Robert then goes to Raleigh. Now, at first, when I was researching Uncle Bob, there was a 20-year gap in his timeline. So from 1880, we saw in the census, right? I didn't find anything else about him until 1900 and then 1920. The 1890 census, as most people know, burned. So that was not available, the federal census. There was a fire in the later in the 1900s that where the records were burned. So there were no records. So this was a tough time for me to try to figure out where was he and how did he get there and why did he leave? He left for better opportunities. And so as I was researching this, I came across an oral interview just by a simple Google search. The names I put in, I knew his name and I knew his employer's name. So I put those names in Google and I came up with an oral history interview. So I'm going to now let you hear a portion of the introduction of the oral history that I heard. A portion of it, hopefully you won't be offended, but there is an offensive word in there. It's short though. Number one. So the person who is being interviewed is Jonathan Daniels. He is the son of Josephus Daniels that Uncle Bob eventually works for in Raleigh.
Okay, I guess the first place to start would be for you to tell me your name, full name, and when and where you were born.
My name is Jonathan Worth Daniels, and I was born April 26, 1902, at the corner of South and Blunt Street in Raleigh, North Carolina, right across the street from Shaw University, and in the margin of a back, what you would now, in your educated condition, call a ghetto, but which was really a nigger town.
Mm-hmm. That when you were born in your parents' home, then?
Yes, my grandfather had built a house shortly after the Civil War. And a lot of the other people, the whites in that area, had moved up to more fashionable Blunt Street. But we stayed in my grandfather's house in a deteriorating neighborhood, as you'd call it. We were very happy there. We had the best neighbors in the world, every one of them was black.
This was Grandfather Bagley?
Bagley, yes. He was the clerk of the state Supreme Court.
So in this candid interview, Jonathan Daniels describes the political and social changes he witnessed in the early 1900s. He said his parents modeled paternalistic behavior in their dealings with the family's black servants, and he recalled that race relations were pleasant. He noted that blacks were subservient.
We had a gardener and a maid, 2 nurses, and a cook. And of course, they were paid nothing. I don't mean to say that my mother and father were particular Scrooges. They paid at least the going rate. And they were weak. I didn't see any difference. I mean, of course, there was a very clear difference between black and white, but there was a very intimate relationship too. Now, that may be difficult for your generation to quite understand. The closeness of the ties. And my mother was, it was paternalism, complete. But in our time, we become a little too unsympathetic with paternalism, because it did put a heart into a relationship, even if it didn't put equality into a relationship. And, well, if somebody was suffering or anything, my mother and father were quick to try to help. And I thought of our servants as just practically members of the family.
Do you remember any of them in particular?
Oh yes, Sophie and Harriet, two were the nurses.
This was the structurally racist society that Uncle Bob had to work in. Mr. Daniels' father, Josephus, actively participated in the notorious 1898 white supremacy campaign in North Carolina. He used his newspaper, the News and Observer, to disseminate Democratic and anti-Black rhetoric. Mr. Daniels' opposition to Black power grew out of Reconstruction era politics, where Blacks in Wilmington, North Carolina, were in public authority positions. Jonathan Daniels said that although his father provided significant political help, he remembered that his father as helpful to Black workers privately. So also later in the clip, we hear and learn that Uncle Bob had been a waiter at the Yarborough House in Raleigh, but was later hired on as staff and moved with the Daniels to Washington, D.C. Being in the nation's capital felt like being in Raleigh, however, at the turn of the century. It too was segregated and they had discrimination, but there was one big difference. The United States had joined the war. That would be World War I. And Robert's employer was now the Secretary of the Navy. He was appointed by President Woodrow Wilson. During the war, Uncle Bob was in his early 40s. So he was not eligible to serve in the military. But Mr. Daniels observed that Uncle Bob possessed higher qualifications than those of a mere messenger. And he was a man who he knew to have the requirements of a civil position. So he went from being a waiter to being a servant in the home to becoming a butler to now becoming a messenger. In 1917, President Wilson waived the civil service rules and authorized Uncle Bob's special appointment as messenger. The president said it was necessary to fill the position by a person of known integrity. And that was printed in the News and Observer in Raleigh, as well as the Washington Times in Washington, D.C. During the war, Uncle Bob needed to travel with Secretary Daniels. So he had to apply for a US passport. He wasn't in the military, he was a civilian, so he needed a passport to travel abroad. While he traveled abroad with the Secretary of the Navy, he also was surrounded by business people and diplomats and other high-ranking officials who represented the United States, including the ambassador to Turkey. He was issued a passport because of that status, but activist and journalist Ida B. Wells was denied a passport after being labeled a known race agitator during this same time frame. During his travel abroad, Uncle Bob's character traits symbolized the excellence and humanity possessed by Black men. And as a part of that wait staff, he traveled to many countries, far away from his hometown of Savannah, Georgia, and even Raleigh, North Carolina. In one encounter in Europe, Uncle Bob was called Snowball because the children had never seen an African-American person in person. Here we see the passport that he applied to, and it lists his birth, the common information, birth, name, date. And then here's a picture of Uncle Bob, Robert H. Gaines. This is a photo that you had to send in with your passport. So in 1917, he was 46 years old and he lived in Washington, D.C. Here is the photo that got this whole presentation started. This is what I saw in my family scrapbook. I can't tell if you can see at the top because of that this black form here where it says live transcription, but it says Robert Gaines. So that's what got started. His name is mentioned in the book, The Small D Democrat, which is a biography of Josepheus Daniels, where he talks about being called Snowball, and he talks about Uncle Bob's humor. Upon returning to Europe, Uncle Bob returned on the USS Leviathan, which has its own history. This is in it says 1819, but it's 1919. 1919, returning to Boston. Here is his abandoned ship card. If all goes wrong on the ship, you got to have this card. Okay, abandoned ship. So Uncle Bob, this is Uncle Bob's card from March 1919, located in the family scrapbook. Also in the family scrapbook is his marriage certificate. So 6 months later, when he came back to the United States, he gets married. He marries Mary Woodson of Virginia, and they go on to have 8 children in Washington, D.C. Tragically, she dies in 1933 after childbirth, similar to his mother who died after childbirth. His wife dies also after childbirth. During this time, in the 1930 census, they are found in Washington, D.C., and they are living in a building that is owned by the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, which was co-founded by Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, and Mary Church Terrell, among others. So Uncle Bob, he left a legacy for his family and community as well, of pride and dignity, as well as service. In this photo, he is being pinned by Captain Edmund Taylor, who was an aide to the Secretary of the Navy, Josepheus Daniels, and he's presented the Meritorious Civilian Service button for 28 years as a messenger in the office of the Navy Secretary. So I want to say before I leave that I am here today because of who he is and the traits that he instilled in other family members. And through his legacy, I'm here to let you know that he paved the way, not only for our family, but for others in the community to go on and become civil servants in the government and to provide opportunities through references for others who wanted to seek government positions in Washington. So thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll take questions later. Thank you.
Full disclosure, mine is not a family member, okay? My name is Derek Jones. First, let me give thanks to Dr. Jody Allen and the Lemon Project staff here at Women Matter, as well as Dr. Sarah Thomas for being so gracious to help me. The information I'm going to share with you is a little bit about the history of baseball. Okay, and that's where I'm going. I'm going to start out this presentation with a narrative, an illustration to provide a mental image in your thoughts as to how words impact our democracy. October 1867 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the Professional Association of Baseball Professionals met about racial segregation per baseball. Then in December of the same year, the nominating committee of the National Association of Baseball Professionals developed a statement related to clubs applying for membership and the issue of race. The statement reads, "It is not presumed by your committee that any club who have applied are composed of persons of color or at any portion of them, and a recommendation of your committee in this report are based upon the view that they unanimously report that the mission of any club which may be composed of one or more colored persons. For that I say, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Romans 3:23. Max Bannon, one of my favorite pitchers in the history of Negro League baseball pitcher, educator, community historian, humanitarian. His answer to that is, forgiveness is the greater part of love. Black baseball and democracy. I say you can't live in this world alone. The time is now, the lives of Black men past, present, and future. This is a mouthful when we examine what the rules for civil and social engagement were at the time and eras of which a Black man had to navigate through life. Mr. Lemon, who was the property of William Mary, and his introduction to democracy was different from Bishop James Madison, 8th President of William Mary and cousin to James Madison, President of the United States. Mr. Lemon was a farmer and a builder who did not own his own work and his own person. Retired Supreme Court Judge Honorable Stephen Breyer has said, democracy is an experiment that is still ongoing. Most of you have heard of the great American experiment, Jackie Robinson integrating Major League Baseball. To a huge degree, was democracy for any of the folks I will discuss make believe? Was it just a concept or thought that did not have meaningful substance? Hence, I want to illustrate my thoughts about two pairs of individuals by comparing and contrasting what democracy looked like and felt like for them. They are Babe Ruth and Oscar Charleston. Secondly, Satchel Paige and Warren Spahn. I chose these four individuals because during their baseball playing days on earth, the color of their skin should not have been a reason for their success in life. And more importantly, the reason for their respect and our friendship for each other. Hence, what did democracy look like and feel like for these four individuals? Taking into account the cards that they were dealt were cards from the same deck. However, someone got more aces than another one. Peggy McIntosh and Tim Wise, both social justice scholars, writes, the virtual invisibility that whiteness affords those who have it is like psychological money in the bank, the proceeds of which we cash in every day while others are in a state of perpetual overdraft. Democracy in the context of this narrative is defined as a government by the people, exercised through the elected representatives with the principle of social equality and respect for all. Individuals within a community, including the following principles: rule of law, freedom of press, respect of human rights, active political process, and enlightened citizens. Social equality are the hinges of which I will mount this conversation to hang from in the swing, open and close the doors. The idea that social equality for African Americans was the basis for any unrelenting changes to the Constitution based on Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 is another narrative to discuss for another day at another time. This narrative provides a framework about democracy which surveys the rights and privileges that all people should be able to enjoy. If Krispy Kreme donuts is America's favorite donut, then democracy is America's favorite experiment. I will provide a snapshot of two pairs of contemporaries, and I say contemporaries, that develop a mutual respect, understanding, and friendship for a gain, and respect for each other. Their collaboration shaped history, not to mention race and generational lines. Change it. First in the lineup is George Herman Roof and Oscar Mckinley Charleston. Roof was born in a tough waterfront section of Baltimore, Maryland. His father had a string of saloons, liquor bars that were located where Camden Yard Stadium is located. As a young boy, he chewed tobacco and drank whiskey, eventually resulting in him going to reform school at age 7 until the age of 12. Oscar, for you in the audience, was a great Negro League baseball player that started out his career in 1915 through 1941. He finished the 8th grade about 1910 and never attended high school. Indianapolis high schools were integrated during his youth. However, athletic teams did not allow to have Black students as athletic players until 1942. Ruth, a Catholic monk at the Reform School, noticed his athletic ability and invited the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, Jack Dunn, to come see him. Dunn took him under his wings, and you know the rest of the story. So you think. If I told you today that I have reason to believe that the only reason that Babe Ruth never managed a major league team was because powers to be believe that he would have integrated Major League Baseball before Jackie Robinson in 1947. That's another story. And remember that Ruth's performance with Negro League players and relationships with African Americans during the Jim Crow era is rarely mentioned. And I got a whole lot of stuff to tell you about that. We can't do it today. Oscar, democracy was not in his favor under the conditions of such a school policy where his Black boys could not participate in athletic activities. Hence, Oscar spent his youth days playing sandlot baseball and was a bat boy for the Indianapolis ABC's Negro League baseball team. He joined the United States military at the age of 15. While in the military, he played one baseball season representing the 24th Infantry in Manila League in the Philippines. Ruth, even though at this point, I'm not able to determine when Ruth barnstormed against Oscar Charleston, and I've looked at every game that Babe Ruth played against men of color. Ruth, he had enormous experiences with baseball games, 17 with teams of Negro Leagues. Ruth disregarded a decree by the commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landers, for barnstorming with or against Negro League teams. Landers suspended Ruth the first 5 weeks of the 1922 season. Sidebar, Ruth was very close friends with the renowned dancer, and I think a number of people may have heard of him, Bill Bojangles Robinson. In fact, Bojangles Robinson may have been the first Black man to enter the Yankees organization clubhouse because of that friendship. Bojangles was an honorary pallbearer in 1948 at Babe's funeral. Oscar was Ruth's contemporary, and I say contemporary. I have reason to believe that he was even better than Willie Mays. Between 1920 and 35, he played on many Negro League baseball teams. After his playing days, he enjoyed playing younger helping younger Black men get into organized baseball. He once said, "I never got the chance to play in the majors because of the color line." The baseball commissioner that replaced Landers was Happy Chandler, and he said Ty Cobb and Oscar Charleston was the greatest ball players that ever laid eyes on. Just prior to Oscar's death, the great Honus Wagner voiced his opinion. "I've seen them all, the great many players in the many years I've been around, and have yet to see one greater than Charleston." Oscar was highly respected by Branch Rickey. Hence, Rickey selected Oscar in '45 as his manager of the Brooklyn Brown Dodgers for the United States League team. Not a lot of people are aware of that before Jackie went in, that was part of Ricky's scheme to integrate baseball. My curiosity can be like that of a 2-year-old. Hence, I contact William Jenkinson, who has researched Babe's life for over 40 years. Part of this research has yielded that Ruth interacted and had positive relationships with individuals from the African-American community. Ruth was certain to have knowledge of Oscar Charleston by inquiring, and he would have greatly admired Oscar Charleston as being a baseball player that performed at such a lofty level. And Oscar will be equally honored for being hailed as a contemporary to Ruth. Okay. His statement says, and was given to him by Wendell Smith, who was a journalist that was writing for the African-American newspaper. He says, "Oscar, I never got the chance to play in the majors because of the color line. Democracy, it has an unearned advantage. There are none for Blacks. And Black men will not succumb to a democracy with dissenting opinions. We have had to deal with resistance all our lives. This resistance, which have dealt with in baseball, have been a chokehold within the elements of democracy. Back in 1951, the process to integrate men of color into the major leagues were done with systematic resistance. Just listen to a quote from Malone Dunkett explaining the process. He says, "Another thing, the major leagues had a quota at the time. They integrated in 1947. And if you look at the timeline of men of color going into the majors, you will find that all the men of color that went in for a period of time, it had to be in pairs. And there was a reason for that. Let me read this quote first. Another thing, the majors had a quota at that time. They was only taking X amount of players, if they took any. The New York National League teams and the Dodgers and the Giants, they did the most, but they had a quota too. That's the reason Ray Damage never made it, because they came out and said, well, we have our 4. I think they had at the time Mays, Willie Mays, Monty Irvin, Hank Thompson, and they had Ray Noble catching. The Dodgers, they had that quota. They had Jackie, Newcomb, Joe Black, and Junior Gillian. And I say that because the 4 that were on the Giants team, that's the only reason Willie Mays came up in 51 was because there was a gentleman by the name of Artie Wilson. Never heard of. Tommy Lasorda said he was the best baseball player, never played in the major. And Artie Wilson gave his position up as a Giants player to allow Willie Mays to come. Democracy in the context of the next 2 contemporaries, race did not get into their path to success. They were both baseball pitchers. However, there was a generational difference between Satchel Paige and Warren Spahn. Satchel was his senior. Their relationship was developed in spite of the scale of democracy being improperly balanced, and unevenly calculated. Warren Spahn started his career during the Jim Crow era of 1942, and he did military duty for the next 3 years. Hence, he actually began his career in 46, 1 year prior to Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Warren spent 21 years in the majors with 362 wins, becoming the winningest left-handed pitcher in Major League Baseball. Spahn was a Buffalo, New York kid, and he was taught to pitch baseball by his father. Satchel was confronted with Jim Crow conditions throughout his life. White-only signs, colored and white drinking fountains, discrimination for housing, discrimination at restaurants, discrimination in baseball facilities and parks, second-class citizenship with interstate travel conditions. A number of you may have heard of the illustration of the Green Book. They would use that to find places to stay. Here in Williamsburg, there was a hotel named Baker House, Clara Baker, in the locals. Yeah, she would house them. She would house them there. Okay. His journey on the diamond stretches from Mobile, Alabama to Cleveland, Ohio. Early in life, he attended Mount Megas Reform School, where he would be mentored and taught to pitch baseball by Reverend Moses Davis. He got his start in baseball in the Negro Southern Leagues, playing with the Chattanooga Light Lookouts under manager Alex Herman. Warren Spahn, his mother would always say, my mother would always say, some people are better than their upbringings in life.